Hello, everyone. Welcome back. For the last few weeks, we've been taking some time trying to figure out what we're going to talk about next, and it seems to be clear that the next topic that we should talk about is Bitlocker. Bitlocker is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the reasons why I got hired at Microsoft. Well, disk encryption in general. It's a story for a longer time. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the different aspects of Bitlocker that you need to be aware of, as sort of a primer to talk about Bitlocker management in the future and the different channels that you can use to manage Bitlocker. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start to kick this off. So first, I want to talk about what it is, right? So Bitlocker is data at rest encryption, and it's usually hardware protected. The Windows 8 timeframe, we actually introduced a password protector for Bitlocker, but generally people who roll out Bitlocker are using hardware protection, typically TPM, to secure the disk encryption or the encrypted container on the device. You can use various methods to protect the data. You can use USB keys, you can use pins, you can use TPM, you can use passwords, you can use recovery passwords. And you should think about all of those as locks on the encrypted container. These locks allow access to the container once you satisfy one of them. So the way that I think about it is there's a bunch of locks on the container, and when you can satisfy one of those locks or you have one of the keys to the locks, you can now access the data that's inside. Typically, these containers have more than one lock on them, and we're going to cover that in a little bit. So let's move a little bit now into how you turn on Bitlocker, what the process is there. And this is going to sort of lay a foundation for you as you start to move through the deployment and management process. One thing that I want to call out here is the configuration that you choose for Bitlocker is going to determine the complexity of your deployment. There are some aspects of Bitlocker, like the use of a PIN, the use of certain encryption ciphers, that are going to create additional management cost or additional overhead cost for you as an IT professional. For a lot of you as IT professionals or as IT admins, you've probably been working with security for a very long time to determine the settings and configurations that need to be deployed to a device. This may be one of the first times that you're dealing with a configuration or a setting that has a direct impact on the complexity to deploy it. It's important that you help security, you help your organization make the right choice to balance security and productivity. Security isn't about just deploying the most secure configuration ever. Security is about balancing the risk versus the productivity while maintaining your enterprise in a secure state, right? So, security folks and security professionals are always going to default to the most secure stance. And it's your job as an IT professional, specifically in the Bitlocker case, to help them understand the cost to choosing that configuration so they can make the determination on additional mitigating factors, the risks involved, and maybe the cost involved with deploying that configuration so you guys can land at some place that works for both of your organizations, right? It does nobody any good to choose a configuration that can't be deployed. What ends up happening is that configuration just never gets deployed and you're inherently insecure. So when you turn on Bitlocker, let's talk a little bit about the basic questions the OS is going to ask itself. It's going to ask itself, am I safe, right? The protectors or the configuration that I want to enable, is there any chance that this is going to cause an issue with the device's ability to operate? Now, most commonly, this manifests itself in two ways. The first is the protector I'm being asked to enable, is it ready and healthy? Most commonly TPM in this case. And the second reason is going to be, or the second area is going to be, am I going to be able to boot? If you were to turn on Bitlocker by yourself, you would notice that there is like a pre-flight boot check before you ever start encrypting a device. That's part of this. The other part is going to be third-party encryption, right? Bitlocker wants you to acknowledge that there's no third-party encryption enabled, because when you encrypt a volume inside of an encrypted container that third-party disk encryptions often use, or third-party disk encryption products often use, that can create sort of less than ideal scenarios. We'll just call them that for a second. The next question is going to ask is, did I escrow the right stuff, right? So was I able to escrow the keys to the locations I'm required to escrow them to? And the third is encrypt the data, right? There are some changes, like changing the encryption cipher, most commonly, that decision is going to need to be made before the disk is ever encrypted. And that can be sort of a race condition. Most commonly for modern devices, right? Some of you might have seen modern devices or secure boot enabled modern standby devices. We have a special name for them. I can't remember them now. But some of those devices come out of the out-of-box experience already encrypted with the default 128-bit encryption strength, AES CBC 128. Now, your organization may ask you to encrypt it at a different cipher strength, maybe AES 256, for example. That's going to have an impact on your deployment process. You're now going to need to start managing that encryption cipher during the out-of-box experience. So that's one of those small changes that you should consider. Now, when the disk is just encrypted and there's no protectors or locks on the disk, we refer to this as I refer to it as the clear encrypted state. What this means is the OS is reading and writing to disk in an encrypted format through that encryption cipher that's been defined, but it's not protected, right? The door is it's a door without a lock on it. Anybody can walk through the door and see the data, that's fine. What happens when you turn on Bitlocker, though, or you enter this protected state, is I add these locks. The most common, as I'm showing on the screen now, is a recovery protector or recovery key. It's a 48-digit password that's used as sort of a break glass scenario or a recovery method. Now, when that recovery password gets added, the first thing now, nobody can get into the disk without providing the recovery password, right? This is the first sort of protector that we talk about. Now, the most common second protector to add would be the TPM, right? Now, when you unlock a disk, you don't have to satisfy all the protectors, right? Now, when you boot a Bitlocker device, you don't have to enter the recovery password each time, right? But you do need to satisfy one. So in this scenario that I have on the screen here, I have a TPM and a recovery password, right? So when the device boots up, it'll look for the TPM to release a key. If the TPM doesn't release the key, then it'll fall back to the recovery password. This is commonly what you hear people refer to as triggering recovery mode, which there isn't technically a recovery mode. It's just the recovery password is the only thing that can unlock the device, right? The reason why this happens is TPM does some measurements on the device before it will release the keys to get access to the volume. Things like checking to make sure the device is healthy, checking to make sure the device configuration hasn't changed. Basically, common indicators of compromise or common indicators that the device isn't in the state it should be in to access the volume. This has changed greatly over time. Today, we see very, very, very few events where the TPM identifies a false positive. Common events where false positives can happen are events where I upgrade the firmware on the device or I make significant changes to the boot order or the boot process of the device. Commonly, organizations look to add a PIN as well. Now, you might think to yourself, is the PIN an additional protector? And the answer is no. The PIN is what I refer to as a compound protector. So what that means is the TPM and the PIN is one lock, and you have to satisfy both of those scenarios in order to gain access to the data. So it's not like I know the PIN or the TPM can unlock it. It's the TPM plus the PIN needs to be present in order to unlock the device. So that's sort of a high-level primer of how the encryption container works and the protectors and how I think about them. Yeah, there's probably different ways to think about them, but this has been the easiest for me over time. Next time, we're going to talk about sort of the three aspects of managing Bitlocker. You can use Intune in Microsoft Entra to manage Bitlocker. You can use Configuration Manager to manage Bitlocker and the Bitlocker management feature therein. Or you can use a combination of group policy and Active Directory with a little bit of scripting sprinkled in order to enable and manage Bitlocker. We'll talk a little bit about each one of those next time. And again, I really appreciate your time and thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned in the following episodes for a little bit more information on how to use each one of these to manage devices. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.